My brothers and sisters in Christ, today's first reading is a passage that is worth our consideration in terms of our daily examination of conscience. And I start off by saying if you don't do one, you should. That's an important part of the spiritual life, is the constant examining of our conscience. And the reason the reading is helpful for today is it invokes, first of all, some themes from the letter of the Hebrews, is invoking some themes from the book of Exodus, as well as from Psalm 95, references to the hardening of the hearts of the people of Israel in the desert. And so when it speaks in this language, and also in places of the evil that human beings do, we have a tendency sometimes to try to think in too much black and white in the spiritual life. For example, sometimes, and I'm not betraying or violating the seal of any person, this is a hypothetical person in the confessional, but sometimes we'll be confronted with the person who comes in and struggles to confess sins, just thinks about it in terms of, well, I'm generally a good person. And the person in this way of thinking, it's, well, I'm a good person or I'm not, I'm good or I'm bad. As long as I'm more good than bad, what are my sins, what to confess, versus an appreciation of everything in between. Part of this has to deal with venial sin and mortal sin. We focus, and in some ways rightfully so, on the grave sins, though those are the big ones that separate us from God, that truly put our souls in jeopardy. Those are the ones that need the most urgent attention, yes. But we can't do so to the extent of ignoring the venial sin. Yes, venial sin does not immediately remove sanctifying grace from us. Venial sin can be forgiven just in our participation of the Eucharist, as opposed to having to go to the sacrament of reconciliation. And yet, venial sin unchecked itself is dangerous in the spiritual life. Why? Because it slowly erodes, or I should say, it slowly accumulates. And so when we think of this image of hardening of heart, it's not as if people in Israel in the desert just flipped a switch and said, I love God, and woke up the next day and said, no, I changed my mind. I'm angry at God. Hardening of heart is something that is a process, a transformation that happens if you accumulate. You think, if we think of hardness of heart like my heart hardening towards someone, what would we say has likely happened? It's the accumulation of wounds over time. Someone has just, done offense after offense, or a violation of trust after violation of trust, to the point that my heart hardens. In the same way, our venial sins accumulate. Any one of those sins, while still an offense against God and therefore very serious, may be more minor, but left unchecked will make us more and more likely to lapse into greater and greater sin, because our hearts harden. Our capacity for pure selfless love is diminished the more and more we're guilty and unchecked of these sins that turn our attention, our love back on ourselves. And so it's very important to check the venial sins as well. I was having a conversation with someone just recently about the fact that venial sin, sometimes there's a trap that we can get very comfortable with them. Sometimes it's like, well, those mortal sins are bad, but there's these venial sins in my life that I know they're bad, but they're comfortable. It's like the comfortable pair of slippers that are like threadbare that you put on, but they're your comfy slippers. And in the same way, we have venial sins in our lives that we don't want to admit it this way, but we're just okay having them. They're comfortable. They're familiar. I don't need to change that. But left unchecked, it accumulates, our heart hardens, and then we will find ourselves more and more susceptible to more and more major sins, to the point where even though we didn't wake up one day and say, I'm going to reject God and commit mortal sin today, wait, how did that just happen? It didn't happen overnight. Our heart was hardened. And so, my brothers and sisters, one of the practical steps we can take is by the daily examination of conscience. To spend each day thinking, first of all, always balance with gratitude. Where was God present to me today? What was a blessing today, for example, that I didn't notice when it happened, but looking back, Where did God really bless me today, or where did he reveal himself to me today? But on the flip side, where did I fall short? Where did I fall short in holiness today? Where did I fall short of what God asks of me? And in those moments, if we can have this examination of conscience, we will find it easier to keep the venial sins in check, to keep them from taking deeper root in us, and move on to a greater life of holiness. May God bless you all.